He's blind. We can't raise a burden like that. That's what my son said about his own baby. In the end, they left him at a shelter. They told me there was nothing I could do. But I walked away and spent years saving money and searching everywhere for his records. My son thought I had moved on. Then one day everything changed. I'm glad you're here. Please follow my story until the end and write the city you're watching from so I can see how far it has reached. My name is Eleanor, and I am 67 years old. I believed I had already seen the worst of human cruelty in my life, but nothing prepared me for what my own son did to his newborn baby on that cold February morning. The call came early in the morning. Olivia, my daughter-in-law, was in labor. After years of trying to conceive, they were finally about to have their first child. I had waited for this moment for so long, dreaming about holding my first grandchild and becoming the grandmother I never had the chance to be before. I rushed to St. Mary's Hospital, my heart beating fast with both excitement and nervousness. The corridors smelled of disinfectant and floor wax, and the fluorescent lights made everything look cold and clinical. I found Nathan pacing outside the delivery room, his face pale and tense. When he saw me, he spoke with relief in his voice and said that there might be complications with the baby. My stomach dropped and I asked what kind of complications he meant. He ran his hands through his dark brown hair and explained that they thought the baby might be blind, something they had detected during delivery. I felt my breath catch, but not because of fear or disappointment. Instead, I felt a strong sense of protection. I said that we would figure it out, that there were resources and specialists, and that we would get through it together. But Nathan's expression changed and became cold in a way that unsettled me deeply. He made it clear that we would not be facing this together. Before I could ask more, a nurse came out of the delivery room carrying a small bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. My grandson. My heart filled as I reached out my arms, but the nurse walked past me and went straight to Nathan. She congratulated him warmly and said he had a beautiful baby boy, healthy otherwise, and that doctors wanted to discuss early options for his vision. Nathan interrupted her harshly and said that they did not want to discuss anything, and that they were not keeping the baby. The nurse's smile faded, and she said she did not understand. At that moment, Olivia's voice came from behind us. She had been wheeled out, looking exhausted but determined, and she said that they could not raise a burden like that and that they had their lives to think about. I stared at them, unable to process what I was hearing. I said that he was their son, just a baby who needed them. Nathan tightened his jaw and explained that he and Olivia had careers and plans, and that they could not sacrifice everything for a disabled child who might never be able to take care of himself. I said that the baby was only 3 hours old, that they did not know what he would be capable of, and that blind people live full and independent lives with families and careers. Olivia coldly replied that it was not their problem, and said that they had already made their decision to surrender him to the state. The nurse looked shocked and suggested they take some time, mentioning emotional stress and available support. But Nathan snapped that they did not need time and asked where to sign. I stepped forward and asked to hold my grandson. The nurse, clearly uncomfortable, gently placed the baby in my arms. He was so small and so perfect. His face was calm, and his tiny fingers were curled into fists. He could not have weighed more than 6 pounds. When I looked at him, he slightly turned his head toward my voice, and I felt my heart break and heal at the same time. I quietly told Nathan to look at him, saying he was beautiful and that he was his son. But Nathan flatly said that the baby was defective, and that they were not equipped to deal with that. Tears ran down my face as I held this innocent child who had already been rejected by the two people who should love him most. I said that then I would take him and raise him myself. Olivia laughed and said that I was 67 years old, that I lived on Social Security and worked part-time cleaning offices, and that I could barely take care of myself. I said that I had raised Nathan. He replied that this was exactly why he would not repeat that experience, especially not with a disabled child who needed constant attention. The baby moved slightly in my arms, and I adjusted the blue blanket. He was so trusting and vulnerable. I asked Nathan again to reconsider, but he turned to the nurse and said that he wanted the baby placed in state care immediately that same day. The nurse looked between us and explained that once the papers were signed, the decision would be permanent and that there was a waiting period of 72 hours. She encouraged them to speak with a counselor first. But Nathan said they did not need counseling, and that everything needed to be done quickly and quietly. I held my grandson closer and said that I would not allow this, that I would fight for him and get a lawyer if necessary. Nathan's expression turned dangerous as he said that I had no legal standing and that if I interfered, he would make sure I never saw the baby again. I said that he was my grandson, but Olivia coldly replied that he was nothing and that he was a mistake they were fixing before it ruined their lives. The nurse stepped in and asked everyone to calm down, reminding us that we were in a hospital, and said she would call social services. She also suggested that I could spend some time with the baby while they spoke with the counselor. For a moment, I thought I saw doubt in Nathan's face, but Olivia took his hand and that doubt disappeared. She said they did not want their son spending time with the baby because it would only make things harder, and insisted that the baby be taken to the nursery while they handled the paperwork. The nurse gently took my grandson from my arms, and it felt like a piece of my soul was being torn away. She softly asked what they would name him. Nathan said they were not naming him, and that it would be for his future family to decide. But I leaned down and softly whispered into the baby's ear, "Your name is Lucas. Lucas Whitaker. And your grandmother loves you more than anything in this world." As the nurse walked away carrying him, I turned back to Nathan and Olivia and told them that they would regret this decision for the rest of their lives. Nathan replied coldly that the only thing he regretted was not realizing sooner what kind of mother I truly was. He went on, saying that this reaction was exactly what he had expected from me, calling it drama, guilt, and an attempt to make everything about myself instead of what he believed was best for everyone. I stood there staring at my son, the man I had given everything to raise, and yet in that moment he felt like a stranger. I asked him how abandoning his newborn child simply because he could not see could possibly be considered what's best. Olivia answered in a calm but cold tone, saying that they were being practical, that they understood some burdens were simply not worth carrying. Something inside me broke, but at the same time something hardened. I told them that if they went through with this and abandoned Lucas, then they would be dead to me, both of them. Nathan only shrugged and said that was fine with him, adding that maybe now I would finally stop trying to control everyone's lives and instead focus on my own. I turned away and walked off before I said something I could never take back. But just as I reached the elevator, Olivia called out after me, telling me not to bother trying to find him, because they were arranging for him to be transferred to a facility in another state and that I would never be able to locate him. The elevator doors closed and I completely broke down. I cried for Lucas, for the innocence he had already lost, and for the family that had rejected him before even giving him a chance. But beneath that grief, something else began to grow. A determination I had not felt in years. I refused to let them win. I refused to let my grandson disappear into the system, forgotten and unloved. I may have failed somehow in raising Nathan, raising a son capable of abandoning his own child, but I would not fail Lucas. I drove back to my small apartment, where the silence felt overwhelming. My Social Security check was $850 a month, and I earned an additional $200 each week cleaning offices downtown. It was not much, but it was something. I decided I would save every possible penny. No matter what it took, I would find Lucas. I would not allow him to grow up believing that no one wanted him or that he was not worth fighting for, because to me he meant everything. 3 months passed after Lucas disappeared into the foster care system. During that time, I visited 17 different facilities across 3 states. My savings, which had once been $3,000, had dropped to $800. Each week I put $200 from my cleaning job into my search fund, leaving barely enough for rent and food. My apartment slowly turned into something like a command center. The kitchen table was covered with folders, each one representing a different shelter, foster home, or adoption agency. On the wall in my living room, I had pinned a large map, marking every place I had already visited with red pins. The empty areas felt like accusations, reminding me of how much more I still had to search. The phone calls were the hardest part. Every morning at the same time I would start calling agencies using different approaches, sometimes pretending to be a volunteer, sometimes a concerned neighbor, and sometimes simply a grandmother asking about adoption procedures. Most of the time the response was polite but firm. They would tell me they understood my concern, but they could not provide information about specific children. I would explain that he was my grandson, that his parents had abandoned him, and that I only wanted to know if he was safe. They would respond that if I was a blood relative, I needed to go through legal channels and ask if I had contacted a family lawyer. I had already contacted 3 attorneys. Each consultation cost me $200 I could barely afford. And every single one of them told me the same thing, without proof of abuse or neglect, and without being officially listed as a guardian, I had no legal standing. Nathan and Olivia had made sure everything was done properly and could not be challenged. But I refused to give up. On Tuesday mornings I worked cleaning offices at Whitaker and Associates downtown. I could not ignore the irony that I was cleaning a building with my ex-husband's family name on it, even if it was unrelated. The work had become more difficult over time. My knees hurt when I knelt down, and my hands cramped from holding the mop too tightly, but every dollar mattered. Mrs. Lynn, who supervised the cleaning crew, noticed how hard I was working. One morning as I finished mopping the lobby, she told me I was pushing myself too much and suggested I take some time off. I forced a small smile and told her I was fine, because I could not explain that fewer hours meant less money for gas, for documents, for cheap motel rooms when the distance was too far to drive in one day. She looked at me with concern and asked if my grandson was still missing. She was the only person who knew about my search. I had told her during a difficult week when I had driven 4 hours to a foster home in Ohio, only to find out they had never taken in any blind infants. I told her I was getting closer and that I had some leads, even though that was not entirely true. That same afternoon, I went to Reeves County Children's Services, my 19th attempt. The building looked newer than most, with large windows and bright decorations in the lobby. A young woman named Emily Carter met me in a small room that smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. I began with the same explanation I had practiced many times, saying I was interested in volunteer work, especially helping families with visually impaired children. Her face brightened, and she said they always needed volunteers with that kind of interest. She asked if I had any experience working with blind children. I hesitated briefly, then said that I had a personal connection, that my grandson had been born with vision problems and that I wanted to help others going through something similar. She called it admirable and started preparing a volunteer application, asking what kind of condition my grandson had. My throat tightened as I answered that he had been born completely blind, and that his parents had not been able to care for him, so he had been placed for adoption. Her expression softened with sympathy as she said that must be incredibly difficult for our family. I admitted that it was, and for the first time in a long while I was not pretending or manipulating the truth. I simply said I wanted to make sure he had ended up somewhere safe, with people who understood his needs. She leaned forward slightly and asked how long ago this had happened. I told her it had been 3 months, and that he was born in February at St. Mary's Hospital. I watched Emily Carter's face closely, trying to catch even the slightest sign of recognition. She stayed quiet for a moment, then spoke gently, explaining that if I was trying to find my grandson, she needed to be honest and say that she could not give any specific information about children in their care. My heart sank, but she continued, saying that she could at least explain how the system worked. Any baby placed there, especially one with special needs, would be given priority and matched with families who had the experience and resources to provide proper care. I asked if that meant he would be placed quickly. Emily Carter nodded and explained that it usually happened within 30 to 60 days, especially for infants. She added that families who were specifically looking to adopt children with disabilities often had shorter waiting times. 60 days. It had already been 3 months since Lucas was abandoned. If what she said was true, then he might already be with a family, possibly even legally adopted by now. I asked if adoptions were usually local. She explained that sometimes they were, but not always. They worked with agencies across the region, meaning a child placed there could end up with a family in Kentucky, Indiana, or even farther away if it was the right match. I felt my hope fading. The idea of the region meant too many possibilities, hundreds of miles, countless families. I had been searching step by step, county by county, but if placements happened across state lines, then my search had been far too limited. Desperately, I asked if there was any way to know whether a child had been successfully placed. Emily Carter looked at me with genuine sympathy and said she wished she could help more. But privacy laws existed to protect both the children and their new families. I nodded, understanding her words, even if I could not accept them. I asked if there was any chance for a grandmother to establish contact, not to interfere, just to know the child was safe. She explained that in some cases adoptive families were open to maintaining connections, especially with grandparents, but those arrangements had to be made before the adoption was finalized, and both sets of parents had to agree. Both parents. I already knew Nathan and Olivia would never agree to something like that. They had made that clear from the very beginning. I left Reeves County with another dead end, but also with something new to think about. If Lucas had already been adopted, then it was likely through an agency that specialized in placing children with special needs. That realization narrowed my search. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a list I had put together from online research, agencies within a 3-state radius that focused on adoptions involving children with disabilities. There were 12 of them. I planned to start calling the next day. But first I counted what money I had left. $420 remained in my search fund. Gas for visiting nearby agencies cost about $40 per trip if the distance was within 2 hours. Longer trips required staying overnight, which could cost up to $80 for a cheap motel. At best, I could afford around 10 more trips before I would have to either earn more money or stop and wait. The thought of waiting felt unbearable. I reached for my reading glasses to study the map again, but noticed that one of the lenses had cracked. Everything looked slightly distorted, as if the world itself had split unevenly. I set them aside and rubbed my eyes, feeling the exhaustion that had become constant. Then my phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Navarro. She asked if I was all right, mentioning that she had seen my lights on very late again. She had lived next door for 8 years and had noticed my strange routine and frequent absences, though she had always been polite enough not to ask too many questions. I told her I was fine and blamed it on trouble sleeping. She said I looked thinner lately and asked if I was eating properly, even offering some food she had made. Her kindness almost broke me. I realized I could not remember the last time I had eaten a proper meal instead of something quick and cheap. I thanked her but said I was not very hungry. She gently asked if something was wrong, saying I seemed different these past months, sadder. I closed my eyes, holding back the urge to tell her everything. She would understand, but she would also try to convince me to stop, to accept what had already happened. I told her carefully that I was dealing with family issues. She replied that family could be complicated, but sometimes people had to decide which battles were worth fighting and which ones would only cause more pain. After the call ended, I looked again at my cracked glasses and thought about her words. Was this search destroying me? I had lost weight, barely slept, and spent money I could not afford. My knees hurt from extra work, and I had developed a cough that refused to go away. But then I thought about Lucas. Only 3 months old, possibly lying somewhere without knowing that someone was searching for him. Someone who loved him enough to give everything just to find him. I picked up my glasses and put them back on. Even if the world looked broken, I could still see well enough to continue. The next day, I would call the specialized adoption agencies. If that did not work, I would expand the search even further. I would work more, spend less, travel farther. I would find Lucas no matter what it cost. 2 years and 8 months after Lucas disappeared, I finally found him. It happened on a rainy Thursday in October, at a moment when I had almost lost all hope. I was sitting in the waiting room of Bright Futures Adoption Services in Louisville, Kentucky. It was my 29th official visit to an agency. By that time, my savings were completely gone. For weeks, I had been living on simple food and cheap coffee. The extra work had taken a toll on my body. My back ached constantly, and arthritis had begun to affect my hands, making even simple tasks painful. But from the moment I entered Bright Futures, something felt different. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman named Nancy Brooks, had a kind expression and did not immediately dismiss my questions about volunteering. She said they were always looking for people who understood the challenges their families faced. She mentioned that I had written about having personal experience with visual impairment in my family. By then, after nearly 3 years of searching, I had perfected my explanation. I told her that my grandson had been born blind and placed for adoption. I said that I wanted to help other families who might be facing similar situations and difficult decisions. Nancy Brooks's expression changed slightly, and she asked when my grandson had been placed. I told her it was in February of 2019, and that he had been born at St. Mary's Hospital. She stayed silent for a moment, and I held my breath. By then, I had learned to recognize the small signs, the pause before rejection, the way people's expressions changed when they realized I was not just a volunteer, but someone searching for a specific child. But this time Nancy Brooks surprised me. She asked if I could wait for a few minutes because she wanted me to speak with their director, Mrs. Reeves. My heart began to race as Nancy Brooks walked down a hallway lined with photographs of smiling families. After about 10 minutes, which felt much longer, she returned with an elegant woman in her 50s who carried a warm but careful expression. She introduced herself as Margaret Reeves and said that Nancy Brooks had told her I was interested in volunteering with families who had visually impaired children. I confirmed that it was very important to me, trying to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Reeves looked at me closely, and then asked if I would mind speaking privately in her office. I followed her, passing more pictures of adopted children with their families. Her office felt calm and welcoming, with soft lighting and plants placed around the room. She gestured for me to sit down across from her desk. Then she said directly that she wanted to be honest with me, and asked if I was actually looking for a specific child. The question caught me completely off guard. After years of careful explanations and avoiding the truth, someone was finally asking me directly. I paused, then decided to tell her the truth. I said quietly that I was searching for my grandson, that my son and his wife had abandoned him because he was born blind, and that I had been trying to find him for almost 3 years. Mrs. Reeves nodded slowly and asked me to explain everything about how he had been placed. I told her the whole story, what happened at the hospital, the way Nathan and Olivia behaved, and all the legal barriers I had faced. She listened without interrupting, though her expression became more serious as I continued. When I finished, she said she needed to ask me something important and that I had to be completely honest. She asked if I was trying to disrupt an adoption or take the child away from a family that had legally adopted him. The question felt like a physical. I said that I only wanted to know if he was safe, loved, and cared for. But she asked what I would do if I actually found him. For a moment I had no answer. I had spent so much time searching that I had never truly thought about what would happen if I succeeded. I admitted that I did not know. I said that I had hoped I could somehow be part of his life, not to take him away from good parents, but simply to love him and make sure he knew that someone from his family cared about him. Mrs. Reeves remained quiet for a few minutes, clearly thinking carefully about what to say next. Finally, she spoke and said that they had placed a blind infant from St. Mary's Hospital in February of 2019. She explained that he had been adopted by a very good family who had specifically been waiting for a child with special needs, and that they had waited 2 years for the right match. My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes. I asked if he was healthy and happy. She smiled gently and said that he was not only doing well, but truly thriving. She explained that his parents were both teachers who worked with children with special needs, and that they had prepared fully for his condition, and provided him with everything he needed. Relief overwhelmed me and I began to cry. After almost 3 years of searching, wondering whether he was safe or even alive, I finally had my answer. He was safe. He was loved. He was thriving. She then told me that his name was Lucas, now Lucas Lynn. She explained that his adoptive parents, Victor and Grace Lynn, had chosen to keep his first name because they felt it was important to respect whatever his birth family had called him. Lucas Lynn. My grandson had a new name, a new family, a completely new life. I asked if she could tell me more about them. She hesitated and reminded me that she was already sharing more than she should, and that confidentiality was extremely important. I begged her, explaining that I had spent everything I had searching for him, worked myself to exhaustion, and that I only needed to know that he was in good hands. Something in my voice must have reached her, because she opened a cabinet and took out a thick file. She told me that Victor Lynn was a special education teacher at Roosevelt Elementary, and that Grace Lynn worked in music therapy at a center for visually impaired children. They had tried to have children for 8 years before choosing adoption, and had spent 18 months preparing specifically to adopt a blind child. I felt both gratitude and pain at the same time. Lucas had found exactly the family he needed, the kind of family I could never have been for him. I asked if they truly loved him. Mrs. Reeves smiled and said that in her 22 years of experience, she had never seen parents more devoted. She explained that they had moved to a single-story house with a fenced yard just for him, learned Braille together before he could even walk, and that Grace had reduced her work hours to spend more time with him. I asked if he knew he was adopted. She said that he was only 3 years old, but that his adoption was discussed openly in the family in a way appropriate for his age. 3 years old. My grandson was already 3, and I had not held him even once since that day in the hospital. I asked what he was like. Her expression softened as she described him. She said he was remarkable, very verbal for his age, loved music, and had an incredible memory. She told me he could recognize dozens of birds just by their songs, move around the house on his own, and had already started showing interest in Braille books. I felt pride rising inside me, followed immediately by deep sadness. I was proud of him, grateful for the life he had, but heartbroken that I was not part of it. Then Mrs. Reeves's tone became more serious as she said she needed to ask me something else. She asked what my intentions were now that I knew where Lucas was. I wiped my tears and admitted that I did not know, because I had never thought beyond finding him. She looked at me carefully and said that she needed to make something very clear. Mrs. Reeves explained that Lucas's adoption had been finalized 8 months earlier, and that the Lynns were now his legal parents in every possible way. She added, in a calm but firm tone, that any attempt to contact them or interfere with their family could be considered harassment. I had finally found Lucas, but I still could not reach him. I asked almost quietly if it would be possible to at least see him from a distance, just once, only to be sure for myself that he was truly okay. Mrs. Reeves looked at me for a long moment and then said that she understood my need for closure, but I needed to think very carefully. She asked me directly whether I would be able to walk away after seeing him. I did not answer because I honestly did not know. After 3 years of searching and sacrificing everything, could I really just turn away? I then asked where they lived. She told me firmly that she could not give me their exact address, but she did say that they lived in Riverside County, about 40 minutes away. Riverside County. After 34 months of searching across different states, Lucas was less than an hour away from me. Mrs. Reeves stood up and told me that I should go home and think carefully about everything. She reminded me that Lucas had a good life with people who loved him deeply, and that I had already found what I was searching for, the knowledge that he was safe and loved. Sometimes, she said, that had to be enough. I nodded and walked toward the door, but then turned back and asked her why she had told me all of this instead of simply refusing to help. She gave a quiet, sad smile and said it was because she was a grandmother too. She understood what it meant to love a child that deeply, but she also knew that sometimes love meant letting go. I drove home in a daze, my thoughts overwhelmed by everything I had learned. Lucas was alive, healthy, loved, and thriving with parents who could give him everything he needed. It was more than I had allowed myself to hope for during the darkest moments of my search, but it still did not feel like enough. I had found him, but I had not seen him. I had not heard his voice or watched him laugh. I had not truly confirmed with my own eyes that the life described to me was real. I knew it was selfish. I knew it could lead to trouble, but I felt that I had to see him just once. Maybe after that I would be able to let go. I spent 3 sleepless nights researching Riverside County before finally finding the courage to go there. Public records led me to Victor and Grace Lynn, both 34 years old, who had bought a ranch-style house on Maple Street in August of 2019, about 6 months after Lucas's adoption. The house had cost $230,000, which suggested they had likely stretched their finances to create a safe and comfortable home for their child. The house was exactly as Mrs. Reeves had described, a single-story home with a large fenced yard and raised garden beds along the driveway. Even from the street, it was clear that everything had been arranged with Lucas in mind. The path to the front door was made of textured concrete, likely easier to navigate by touch, and wind chimes hung near the porch, probably helping him orient himself when playing outside. I parked 3 houses away on a Tuesday morning, my hands trembling as I held the steering wheel. I questioned what I was doing, hearing Mrs. Reeves's warning in my mind, but I could not bring myself to leave. Not yet. At that moment, the front door opened, and a woman stepped outside holding a small backpack in the hand of a young boy. My breath caught instantly. Even from about 50 yards away, I knew it was Lucas. He was small for his age, with dark hair and the same serious expression I remembered from when he was a newborn. He walked beside the woman, who I assumed was Grace, confidently, his free hand gliding along a rope that had been placed along the edge of the driveway. When they reached the sidewalk, he let go of her hand and moved slightly ahead, using a small white cane adapted for his size. I watched, unable to look away as they walked down the street. Lucas moved with confidence and purpose, occasionally pausing to listen, to a dog barking, a car passing, or birds singing nearby. When a neighbor greeted him, he turned in the correct direction, waved, and replied clearly, wishing her a good morning by name. They were heading toward a small park at the end of the street. I waited until they were out of sight, then drove slowly past their house, trying to notice every detail. Children's drawings were taped to the front window, and through the curtains I could see what looked like a piano. A basketball hoop had been lowered on the garage door, likely so Lucas could learn to play using sound. I parked near the park and walked over, keeping enough distance so I would not be noticed but still close enough to watch. Grace sat on a bench while Lucas explored the playground. He moved carefully, using his hands to understand each piece of equipment before climbing or sliding, but there was no fear in him. At one point, Grace called out to him, reminding him to stay where she could hear him. He answered right away, saying where he was, on the swings, and called her Mama. That single word struck me deeply. But as I watched her, the way she paid attention, the way she supported him without holding him back, the warmth in her voice, I understood something clearly. She was his mother in every way that truly mattered. I stayed there for 45 minutes, watching him play with a confidence and joy that was impossible to ignore. When another child came over, Lucas introduced himself and suggested they take turns. He was open, friendly, and clearly loved. As they prepared to leave, I heard Grace ask if they should stop by the library on the way home, mentioning that there might be new Braille books available. Lucas responded with excitement and asked about a specific book, and she told him they could check for it. I followed at a distance as they walked to the library 2 blocks away. Through the large windows, I watched as Grace helped him navigate inside, where a librarian greeted them both by name. She handed Lucas a small book, and he immediately ran his fingers across it, his face lighting up with joy. This was his world. People who knew him, supported him, and cared for him. A life filled with attention, understanding, and love. It was everything I had hoped for during those 3 long years of searching. Everything I could never have given him myself. But simply watching from a distance was not enough. I needed to hear his voice, to see his smile up close, to somehow step into the world he had built without me. I waited until the next Thursday and returned to the library at what I believed was their usual time. This time, instead of staying outside, I went in. The children's section was almost empty, with only Grace, Lucas, and Ms. Dawson there. I stood nearby, pretending to browse large print books while trying to listen to their conversation. Ms. Dawson was explaining that the book they had chosen was about a boy building a boat and testing different materials to see which ones float best. Lucas responded with curiosity, asking if it was like an experiment, and she confirmed that it was. She added that his mother had mentioned he had been doing experiments at home. Lucas nodded with excitement and explained that they had planted seeds in different types of soil to see which would grow faster. He said the ones in the darker soil were currently winning, though the result was not final yet. I smiled quietly. Grace was clearly teaching him through real experiences, encouraging his curiosity in a way that suited him perfectly. Grace then asked if they should take that book along with the one about the train conductor. Lucas agreed and asked if they could read them when they got home. She said yes, but reminded him that after lunch there would be quiet time. He responded that he liked quiet time because it allowed him to practice his piano. They walked toward the checkout desk, and without thinking I followed, still pretending to look at books nearby. As Ms. Dawson scanned the books, Lucas suddenly turned slightly in my direction and mentioned that someone nearby smelled like lavender, adding that it was a pleasant scent. My heart stopped. That scent was from the lotion I had used for years. Even though he could not see me, he had noticed me. Grace looked around and then politely addressed me, explaining that her son had been commenting on my perfume. I froze, unsure how to respond. This was the closest I had been to Lucas since the day he was born, and I was afraid that even my voice might reveal too much. I managed to thank her and said that lavender was my favorite. Lucas smiled in my direction and said that his grandmother used to wear lavender before she passed away, and that his mother had told him how smells can remind people of those they love. So he had a grandmother he remembered fondly, someone who had loved him and left him with warm memories. It should have comforted me, but instead it made me feel the absence even more. I told him that his grandmother must have been very special. He answered simply that she was, and said that she had taught him how to recognize flowers by their scent. Then he offered to show me. Before Grace could stop him, he walked to a small display of artificial flowers and began demonstrating, picking them up one by one and explaining how real ones should smell. He said the rose did not smell right because real roses are sweeter and more layered, and that daisies usually have very little scent unless you are very close. I watched him, amazed at his confidence and knowledge. I told him he was very smart and I meant it completely. Grace said proudly that he knew more about flowers than most adults and that he was even teaching her. Lucas smiled brightly at the praise, and I felt my heart both ache and heal at the same time. He was loved, encouraged, and supported. He was living the life I had only hoped for during my search. After a moment, Grace gently said it was time to go home for lunch and began gathering the books. Lucas turned toward me and said it was nice to meet me, even though we had not been properly introduced. I told him it was nice to meet him too, holding back tears. As they left the library with Lucas walking confidently beside her using his small white cane, I realized I was facing a decision I could not avoid. I had found him. I knew he was safe, loved, and thriving. Mrs. Reeves had been right, this should have been enough. I should have walked away, satisfied that everything had ended as well as it possibly could. But standing there after hearing his voice, seeing his curiosity, and feeling his kindness even toward a stranger, I knew I could not accept that this was the end. I was not ready to remain just a faint memory connected to the scent of lavender. I wanted more. I wanted to be part of his life. The question was whether that desire came from love or from selfishness, and whether acting on it would help him or harm the life he had with his family. I drove home that afternoon, caught between relief and longing. Lucas was everything I had hoped for. Intelligent, confident, loved, and happy. The Lynns were everything I had hoped his adoptive parents would be, devoted, capable, and fully committed to his well-being. I should have felt grateful. I should have felt at peace. But I was not ready to disappear from his life without ever truly being part of it. That evening I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a letter, unsure whether I would ever send it. I introduced myself as Lucas's biological grandmother, and explained that I had been searching for him for 3 years, and had recently learned about his adoption through Bright Futures. I made it clear that I was not trying to interfere with their family or make any claims, and that I could see he was thriving in their care. I expressed my gratitude and carefully asked if there might be even a small possibility for me to be part of his life. Not replacing anyone, but simply as another person who loved him and wanted to support him. I acknowledged that they owed me nothing and that Lucas's well-being came first, and I ended the letter with my name. I sat there for hours rereading it, thinking about every word. Sending it could change everything. Not sending it meant walking away forever and accepting that the short moment in the library would be the only real connection we would ever have. By midnight I still had not decided. I finally sent the letter on a Friday morning, 3 days after writing it. My hands were trembling as I dropped it into the mailbox outside the post office, and almost immediately doubt filled my mind, making me wonder if the Lynns might react with fear or anger, or even see me as someone who had crossed a line by quietly watching their child from a distance. I kept thinking that maybe they would move away to protect Lucas from me, but it was already too late. The letter had been sent, carrying my hopes and fears to people who had no reason to trust me. I waited 5 long days before the phone finally rang. "Mrs. Whitaker, this is Grace Lynn." My heart stopped. Her voice was calm but careful, not friendly but not cold either. I held the phone tighter and thanked her for calling, admitting that I was not sure she would. She said that my letter had been unexpected and that she and Victor had discussed it a lot, and that they had some questions. I said that I would answer anything they wanted to know. There was a short pause before she continued, saying that they needed to understand my reasons. She explained that Lucas's birth parents had made it clear they wanted no contact, and had signed papers stating that no biological relatives should have access. Those words hit me hard. I said quickly that it had not been my decision, and that I had fought against it from the beginning. She asked me to explain exactly what had happened. She said they were told that Lucas was surrendered because his parents were not ready to raise a special needs child, but no details about other family members were given. I took a deep breath and told her everything: the hospital, Nathan and Olivia, their threats, and my 3-year search. As I spoke, I could hear the pain in my own voice. She listened without interrupting until I finished. Then she stayed quiet for a moment. Finally, she said that it must have been very difficult and I could hear real sympathy. She added that she and Victor had no idea I existed or that I had been searching. I said quickly that I understood if they did not want me involved, but I needed them to know that someone had loved him from the beginning, that he was not unwanted by everyone. She then asked where I had been living during all this time. I told her I had stayed in Louisville and never moved, because I hoped that if Lucas ever searched for his birth family, he might start there. There was another pause. Then she asked if I would be willing to meet with her and Victor without Lucas at first so they could talk in person before making any decisions. Hope rose inside me. I said yes immediately and told her I could meet anytime and anywhere. She suggested the next afternoon at a coffee shop called Miller's on Main Street in Riverside and asked if I knew it. I said I would find it. She also made it clear that they were not promising anything and that Lucas's well-being came first. I said I understood. After the call ended, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the phone, trying to process what had just happened. They were willing to meet me. They had not reacted with anger or fear. They were at least considering the possibility. The rest of the day I spent nervously preparing, changing clothes several times and thinking about what I would say. I wanted them to see me as stable and trustworthy, someone who would not complicate Lucas's life. The coffee shop was small and cozy, with simple furniture and artwork on the walls. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table in the corner. At exactly the agreed time, a couple walked in, and I immediately recognized them as Lucas's parents. Victor was tall and thin, with kind eyes behind glasses. Grace was smaller, with short brown hair and a careful but warm expression. They looked like people devoted to helping children. Grace approached and asked if I was Mrs. Whitaker. I stood up, shook their hands and asked them to call me Eleanor. I thanked them for meeting with me. We sat down and after a short silence, Victor said that they wanted to be honest about their concerns. I nodded. He said that Lucas was doing very well, that he was happy and secure, and that they were worried about introducing confusion into his life, especially about his adoption. I said quickly that I would never want to confuse him. I added that I did not expect him to see me as a grandmother the same way he knew Grace's mother, but I just wanted him to know that someone from his biological family loved him. Grace then asked about my son and why he had made that decision. I said carefully that Nathan had always cared about success and appearances, and that when Lucas was born with a disability, he could not see past that. I said it was their loss. Victor asked if my son might ever come back or try to contact Lucas. I shook my head and said no, explaining that Nathan had completely cut that connection and wanted nothing to do with him. Grace then asked about his name. I said quietly that I had whispered the name Lucas to him in the hospital before he was taken away, and that when I found out they had kept that name, it meant everything to me. Grace said they felt it was important to keep the name as a way to honor his earliest connection. I wiped my eyes and apologized, saying I did not mean to get emotional, but that I had thought about him every single day for 3 years. Victor and Grace looked at each other, sharing a silent understanding. Then Grace continued and said they needed to ask some practical questions. She asked if I had any history of mental illness, substance abuse, or criminal activity. I said no and explained that I had worked the same cleaning job for 8 years and lived in the same apartment for 12 years, and that I could provide references. Victor then asked what I expected if they allowed me to have contact with Lucas. I said that I did not expect anything specific and that I understood they were his parents, and that their decisions about his life would always come first. I said that I simply hoped to be someone in his life who would love him unconditionally, someone who could tell him about his early life and maybe share parts of his biological background if he ever became interested. Grace then asked, gently but firmly, what I would do if he did not want a relationship with me. The question hurt, but I had already thought about it. I said that I would respect that completely, because Lucas's happiness mattered more than anything. Victor stayed quiet for a moment, then asked about the lavender perfume. I was confused at first, but Grace explained that Lucas had come home from the library talking about a kind woman who smelled like his grandmother Rose, and that he had been very touched by the interaction. I felt my face grow warm as I realized they knew I had spoken to him. I apologized, saying I should not have done that without their permission, but when he mentioned the lavender, I could not stop myself from responding. Victor asked if I had told him who I was. I said no, explaining that we had only spoken briefly about flowers. For the first time, Grace smiled slightly and said that Lucas had been asking if they might see me again at the library. She mentioned that he had said I seemed lonely, and that he wanted to tell me more about flowers and gardens. That made my heart ache and swell at the same time. Even in such a short moment, Lucas had noticed something and wanted to reach out. Grace then said that she and Victor needed time to discuss everything privately, but she wanted me to know that they were not against the idea of me being part of Lucas's life in some way. They just needed to find the right way to do it, something that would be healthy for everyone, especially for him. I asked what that process would involve. Victor explained that if they decided to continue, they would begin with supervised visits, where I could spend time with Lucas while one of them was present. If everything went well over time, they might consider allowing more. Grace added that they would also need to explain things to Lucas in a way appropriate for his age, because they believed in honesty, but also wanted to protect his emotional well-being. I agreed immediately, saying that it sounded like more than I had hoped for. Victor said they would call me by the end of the week after thinking it through, and possibly speaking with Lucas's therapist about the best way to proceed. The mention of a therapist did not surprise me. It only confirmed how thoughtful they were. I thanked them sincerely for even considering it. Before leaving, Grace paused and asked me one more question. She wanted to know what had kept me going all those years, what made me believe the search was worth it. I thought for a moment before answering that every child deserves to know they are loved unconditionally. Lucas had not chosen his situation, and he did not deserve to grow up thinking that no one in his biological family wanted him. Grace nodded slowly and said that was a beautiful reason. As I drove home, I felt something I had not felt in 3 years, hope, mixed with a sense of peace. Even if they decided not to allow contact, they now knew that Lucas had a grandmother who loved him, and one day they could tell him that. But deep inside, I believed they would say yes. I had seen the way they looked at each other, how carefully they considered everything. They were people who understood love in all its forms. 3 days later, Grace called. She said they would like to invite me to dinner on Sunday. She explained that Lucas did not yet know who I was, but they had told him a friend who loved gardening would be visiting. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed, and thanked her again and again. She reminded me that they would take things slowly, and that if at any point it did not feel right for Lucas, they would need to reconsider. I said I understood completely. She told me the time and suggested I bring some seeds or bulbs, since Lucas had been asking about starting a winter garden. After the call ended, I sat in my quiet apartment and cried, this time from relief and happiness. In 4 days, I would sit at the same table with my grandson. I would hear his voice, watch him eat, maybe even plant something with him. It had taken 3 years, $15,000, and nearly all my strength, but I had found Lucas. More importantly, I had found a way to love him without harming the life he had with his family. I could not wait for Sunday. 6 months passed after that first dinner with Lucas, and I had never felt happier. The Lynns slowly allowed me to become part of his life. Sunday dinners, Saturday mornings in the garden, and occasional visits to the library or park. Lucas came to know me as Grandma Eleanor. He understood that I was different from his grandmother Rose, but he accepted me easily, with the same natural warmth he showed everyone. We planted a winter garden together, just as Grace had suggested that first day. Lucas could recognize every plant by smell and touch, and he proudly showed others what we had grown. On one Saturday morning, while we were gathering the last of the autumn lettuce, everything changed. I was kneeling in the soil, guiding his hands to the best leaves, when I suddenly heard a car door slam in the driveway. Grace was inside preparing lunch, and Victor was away at work, so we were not expecting anyone. Lucas turned his head toward the sound and said that someone had arrived. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my knees, and in that moment I completely froze. Nathan was walking toward us with firm, determined steps, and a woman I did not recognize followed just behind him. My son looked exactly the same, tall, well-dressed, with that same barely controlled anger on his face that I remembered from the hospital 4 years earlier. Lucas, we should go inside, I said quickly. But before we could move, Nathan's voice cut sharply across the yard. So this is where you've been keeping him? Lucas moved closer to me, unsettled by the harsh tone in the stranger's voice. Grandma Eleanor, who is that man? My heart was racing as I wrapped my arm around him protectively. Lucas, go inside and find your mama, all right? Tell her we have unexpected visitors. But Nathan was already coming closer, His eyes fixed on Lucas with a look that made me uncomfortable. The woman beside him, blonde, dressed in expensive clothes, most likely his new wife, stayed slightly behind, looking uneasy. "You can't be serious," Nathan said as he stopped a few feet away. "You've been acting like a grandmother to my son behind my back." "He is not your son," I said firmly, stepping in front of Lucas. "You gave up that right the day you left him at the hospital." Lucas's small hand gripped mine tightly. "Grandma Eleanor, I'm scared." "It's all right, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just stay right here with me." Nathan's expression changed as he really looked at Lucas for the first time. I could see him noticing the confidence in his posture, how healthy he looked, the clear intelligence in his face, even though he could not see. This was not what Nathan had expected. This was not a burden. This was a strong, thriving child. He looks good," Nathan said, and there was clear surprise in his voice. "He is doing well," I answered coldly. "Not because of you." At that moment, the front door opened and Grace came outside, immediately understanding the situation. Her face turned pale when she saw Nathan, but she walked toward us quickly, protective and focused. "Lucas, come here, sweetheart," she said, reaching out her hand. But Lucas stayed where he was. He pressed closer to me and said, "Mama, this man is scaring Grandma Eleanor." His voice sounds angry. Nathan watched him call Grace Mama, and something passed across his face, something like jealousy or regret. But it did not matter anymore. "I am Lucas's biological father," Nathan said, as if that still meant something. "I came to talk about his future." Grace's voice turned cold. "You are not listed anywhere as his parent anymore. You gave up those rights permanently." "I changed my mind," Nathan said. "I want him back." The words hung in the air like a threat. Lucas tightened his grip on my hand, and I could feel him trembling slightly. "You cannot take him back," I said, my voice rising. "He already has a family who loves him. You cannot just come back after 4 years and decide you want to be a father again." Nathan's jaw tightened. "I am his biological father. I have rights." "You do not have any rights," Grace said firmly. "Victor and I adopted him legally. You signed everything away. Those documents can be challenged." The blonde woman spoke for the first time. "My name is Lauren Hayes. I am Nathan's wife, and I am also a family lawyer. In some cases, adoptions can be overturned, especially if the father was pressured or misled." I felt a cold wave run through me. This was not just a visit. They had come ready for a legal fight. "What exactly do you want?" I asked directly. Nathan looked at Lucas again, as if trying to understand who he had become. "I want to know my son. I want to be part of his life." "No." The answer came from Lucas, clear and firm. He stepped slightly forward, standing protectively. "I don't want to know you. You made Grandma Eleanor sad for a long time, and now you are scaring my mama. You should leave." Nathan looked stunned. He had clearly expected something else. "Lucas, I am your real father," he said, lowering himself to Lucas's level. "I made mistakes, but I want to fix them." Lucas tilted his head, listening carefully. Not just to the words but to the tone behind them. "You don't sound sorry," he said calmly. "You sound like you want something." Lauren Hayes stepped forward again. "Mr. and Mrs. Lynn, my husband is prepared to take legal action if necessary, but we would prefer to arrange visitation peacefully." "No," Grace said immediately. "I would not refuse so quickly," Lauren Hayes continued. "A biological father who was young and overwhelmed at the time, who has now matured, remarried, and can provide stability, some judges might see that as important." I felt sick. They were ready to turn this into a legal battle and destroy Lucas's world. "Why now?" I asked sharply, looking directly at Nathan. "Why, after 4 years, do you suddenly care?" Nathan stood straight, losing some of his composure. "Lauren Hayes and I have been trying to have children. The doctors said it might not be possible. When I found out about Lucas and saw how well he is doing. So now you see him as useful?" I interrupted, disgusted. "That is not what I meant." "That is exactly what you meant." My voice rose as years of anger came out. "You threw your son away when he was inconvenient. Now that someone else has raised him with love, you want to come back and take him." Lucas had been listening the entire time, his face serious. Grandma Eleanor, he said quietly, holding my hand. Is this really the man who did not want me when I was a baby? The question stayed in the air. Nathan reacted, but I told the truth. Yes, sweetheart. This is the man who decided he could not love you because you are blind. Lucas nodded slowly, then turned toward Nathan. I forgive you, he said clearly. But I don't need you to be my father. I already have one who loves me exactly as I am. Nathan's face turned pale. He had just been rejected by a child who showed more honesty and strength than he ever had. Lauren Hayes tried again, changing her tone slightly. She asked whether he might want to have two families who loved him. Your adoptive parents and your biological father. Lucas thought about it for a moment, taking it seriously, and then slowly shook his head. He said that he only needed one real family, and that he already had that. Grace stepped forward and lifted Lucas into her arms. She said they were going inside now, and if anything needed to be discussed further, it could be done through their lawyer. But as she turned to carry him toward the house, Nathan made a move that showed exactly who he was. He reached out and grabbed Lucas's arm, trying to stop them. He insisted that he had a right to speak to him. Lucas cried out, frightened and confused, and Grace immediately held him tighter, telling him not to touch her son. That was the moment everything inside me snapped. All those years of searching, all the pain, the sacrifices, and the love I had for this child came together in a wave of anger I had never felt before. I stepped between them, my voice quiet but sharp. I told him that if he ever touched Lucas again, if he ever scared him again, or tried to interfere in his life in any way, I would make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person he truly was. Nathan responded that I could not threaten him, but there was no strength behind his words. I answered that it was not a threat, it was a promise. I took out my phone and opened my photos, showing him copies I had made, the adoption papers, the documents he had signed when he gave up his rights. I told him I had everything, every paper proving how easily he had walked away, every record showing he wanted nothing to do with Lucas until it became convenient. Lauren Hayes' confidence wavered. She said those records were sealed, but I answered that while they were not public, family members could still request them. It was a bluff, but it sounded convincing. I added that I also had statements from hospital staff who remembered exactly how he and Olivia had treated a newborn child. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. I told him to walk away now, and I would stay silent about what kind of father he had been. But if he dragged Lucas into a legal fight or hurt him in any way, I would make sure his new wife knew everything. Nathan's face shifted through anger, fear, and calculation. Finally, he looked at Lucas again, at how tightly he held on to Grace, how clearly he had chosen his real family. He said it was not over, but the strength had already left his voice. I told him firmly that it was over, reminding him that he had made his choice 4 years earlier and now had to live with it. As Nathan and Lauren Hayes walked back to their car, Lucas slid down from Grace's arms and came to stand beside me. He asked if they were going to try to take him away. I knelt down, taking his hands in mine, and told him no, that his parents would never allow that, and neither would I. He nodded simply and said that was good because he wanted to stay here with his real family, including me. We watched the car disappear down the street, and I felt a deep sense of calm settle inside me. I had protected him from the people who once abandoned him. I had found my place in his life without breaking the family that had saved him. 3 years of searching and sacrifice had led to this moment. Not some dramatic ending or perfect reunion, but something quieter and stronger. A real victory. A family built on love instead of blood. One that protected each other from harm. Lucas slipped his small hand into mine and asked if we could finish picking the lettuce, because he wanted to show Papa Victor the garden later. I told him of course, and led him back to where we had been working before everything had been interrupted. As we knelt in the soil together, with Lucas happily talking about what would be ready to harvest next, I understood clearly that this was exactly where I belonged. Not as someone who saved him or replaced anyone, but simply as someone who loved him deeply and would always protect him. I had found my grandson. And more than that, I had found my place in the family that chose him, and that he chose in return. That was enough. That was everything. Now I wonder about you, the one listening to my story. What would you do in my place? Have you ever experienced something like this? Share your thoughts below. And on the final screen you can find 2 more stories that many people on this channel love, They might surprise you as well. Thank you for staying with me until the end.